I also wonder if we're going a little too overboard with stuff. So, for example, we see this a lot in hiring, right? I mean, I remember when you would apply for a job way back in the day, you would apply for a job and you would talk to a human, and a human would call you and you'd have this human relationship. And today you apply for a job and now you're like playing a game on your phone that looks at your soft skills. You're talking to a bot that looks at your, in other words, you're going through like all these things around technology. Something is scanning your resume, looking for keywords, and you go through all these steps. And if you're lucky that you don't get flagged in any of these things, then maybe you get to talk to a human. And I remember I was talking to Nolan Bushnell a couple of years ago. He was a guest on this podcast, and he was the first boss of Steve Jobs. And he was telling me this story about how he hired Steve Jobs. And he's like, yeah, I met the guy. I interviewed him for a couple hours and I gave him the job. Like then and there, I just shook his hand and he started working. It didn't take 3 months. He didn't play any games. He didn't get filtered through an algorithm. Like it was just a human thing. So part of me wonders if we're removing the human aspect from a lot of our work and a lot of our life that should just be human. Hiring, interviewing people. I mean, shouldn't that just be a human thing? Why are we bringing technology into that?
I think this is such an interesting example because it's double-edged. I think you can imagine someone critiquing the Steve Jobs anecdote and saying, well, this is a perfect example of privilege, right? Steve Jobs happened to already be in Silicon Valley. He happened to be friends with this guy. They shook hands, they had some coffee, and then he had a job. Well, what about all the people that can't afford to live in Northern California unless they already have a job? Or what about the people who, wouldn't happen to be friends with this guy through his social network, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think there is a well-intentioned push towards this more meritocratic society where we say, no, anyone in the world who wants to apply for this job, apply, and we're going to pick the best candidate out of everyone rather than just going through the friends of our existing employees. I think there's something totally, well-intentioned about that. The problem you have on the backside is that you then end up with more job applicants than you have the ability to actually filter. And so then you turn to something like this machine learning tool. And, there are many horror stories about machine learning being used in hiring. One of my favorites comes from Amazon. They built a tool in like 2016, 2017 to...
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, it would rank job applicants on a scale, I think it was from 1 to 5 stars. So ironically, the same way that users on Amazon rank products. And one of the real problems with the model that they built was, to make a long story short, it would look for sort of any linguistic patterns in common with kind of the hires that they had made in the past. So any language on their CV or resume or application, and just try to hire more people like that. The problem was that in the past, their engineering hires had been overwhelmingly male, and so upon closer inspection, they realized that their model was rejecting candidates or penalizing candidates who used the word women's in their resume. I played on the women's soccer team, or I went to a women's college, or whatever. They were able to delete this particular part of the model, but on even closer inspection, it was penalizing people for talking about playing field hockey or sort of female-skewed hobbies, sports. Ultimately, Amazon just ended up scrapping the model entirely because it was sort of inextricable. They couldn't get rid of all of these really problematic associations. So I think that leaves us with a genuine conundrum, to your point.